Martin Luther King Jr. visited Springfield College and gave the commencement speech in 1964, exactly 50 years ago this year. Well, as we get ready to celebrate Dr. King's birthday, we have Springfield College professor Martin Dobrow here to talk about his legacy and connection to the Springfield area. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me
today. So let's talk about Dr. Martin Luther King. He's coming to Springfield College to give the commencement speech 50 years ago. But something almost stops him. He almost doesn't get here. It almost doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's a remarkable local story and a little-known local story. There were sort of two waves in which Dr. King almost did not make it to Springfield College. He was approached initially in March of 1964 by former Springfield College president Glenn Olds and agreed to come. But in the interim, the FBI was trying to influence Dr. Olds to uninvite Martin Luther King. They enlisted the help of a U.S. Senator, Leverett Saltonstall, who spoke to Olds based on some wiretapped information about Dr. King. And there was some pretty heavy-handed pressure put on the Springfield College president essentially to rescind this invitation. This is all easily documented in FBI files that have been declassified. They're still somewhat redacted, but still it's quite evident that this happened. It was a real sort of moment of truth for this president, Glenn Olds. Very difficult. But
he didn't move. He didn't uninvite him?
He did not uninvite him. You know, I think that it was a lot of pressure. It was a difficult decision. I think he paused for a while with it. A lot of times great leaders do pause. I think Lincoln took a long time before coming to the Emancipation Proclamation. JFK, before coming around to civil rights, took some time. Even Martin Luther King was a little slow to take on the leadership in Montgomery at the beginning of the civil rights movement. But Glenn Olds stood tall, did the right thing, and the decision was made in mid-April to go through with this invitation. So the commencement was set for June 14th, 1964.
All right, so you would think everything's all set, everything's fine, but that almost still didn't happen because a couple of days before the commencement speech.
Absolutely. So what happened is that the commencement was set for June 14th, 1964. On June 11th of 1964, Dr. King was arrested in St. Augustine, Florida, for ordering food from a whites-only establishment. He was in jail the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. The commencement is just on the 14th. So it was touch and go for quite a while as to whether or not Dr. King would make it. And this sort of opens up to a fascinating and I think much overlooked part of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine, Florida. Many people who are conversant with civil rights are very familiar with certainly the Montgomery bus boycott. They're familiar with the dogs and the fire hoses in Birmingham. They're familiar with Bloody Sunday in Selma. But the movement in St. Augustine, I think, has largely been overlooked. And it was a fascinating time that brought together King and the Klan, brought together a number of students, some from this area as part of a student protest. Jackie Robinson went down there. So it was a real fascinating collision of American history that ultimately, spilled onto our campus at Springfield College.
So he was released from jail the day before he gives the commencement speech, comes up to Springfield College, gives the commencement speech. What are some of the things that kind of stick out to you when you read or when you learn about the commencement speech that he gave at Springfield College?
Well, I think it's a wonderful speech. I mean, Dr. King obviously was, I think, the great public speaker of, perhaps American history. I find myself to this day listening with great interest and being so moved by the speeches of Dr. King. Had this incredible evocative ability and this wonderful resonant baritone voice that just went right to the heart. And he gave many, many speeches. And there's certainly echoes of other famous speeches in his Springfield College commencement address. One of the things I found most interesting about it is that it began to speak more to nonviolence in terms of the peace movement. He's very much associated, I think, in the public mind with the civil rights movement. But in his later years, he was assassinated in 1968, his later years, he became an ardent opponent of the Vietnam War, and you see some seeds of that in his speech at Springfield College.
And you're writing a book about Dr. King.
Indeed, I am. Yeah, it's a book that traces the 10-month and 5-day period between the March on Washington in August of 1963 and the signing of the Civil Rights Act on July 2nd, 1964. And that's a sort of two signpost moments of great optimism in American history, but they encompass a lot of darkness. You know, in between there was the bombing of the Birmingham church that killed 4 schoolgirls. In September of 1963, there was obviously the assassination of President Kennedy. In November of '63, there was the disappearance and murder of 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi in June of '64. So there were a lot of dark things that happened in there. And so I'm sort of tracing that time period, and largely through a local angle. You know, so the Springfield College commencement story, which I think is a fascinating one, is one of the central stories. But there are a number of other local angles that I think are quite interesting.
And if somebody wants to get a taste of what Dr. Martin Luther King was before your book comes out, you're going to be holding an event Wednesday.
Yes, on Wednesday night over at Springfield College in Fuller Arts Center at 7 o'clock, I'm going to be giving a multimedia presentation about the 50th anniversary of this speech and the circumstances surrounding it. The public is quite welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Martin Dobrow. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.